The night my husband laughed at me across the dinner table. I made a decision I never told him about. Not that night, anyway. I just folded my napkin very carefully, set it beside my plate, and went to bed early. I lay there in the dark listening to him finish his wine downstairs, and I thought, I will remember this moment for the rest of my life. His name is husband Richard Beaumont. We had been married 34 years by then. 34 years of me driving his clients to the airport when he had a conflict. 34 years of me proofreading contracts at midnight, managing the household accounts, keeping his calendar, hosting his business dinners. I did not have a title. I did not have a salary. I was just his wife, which, in Richard's world, was something between a personal assistant and a very good piece of furniture. I am 62 years old. My name is Catherine, and this is my story. It started, the laughing, the whole undoing of the version of myself I had agreed to be, when I mentioned, over a Tuesday night dinner of roast chicken, that I had been thinking about starting a small catering company. Not even a big company, just something I had been turning over quietly for about a year. I had spent decades feeding people beautifully. Every Christmas party Richard threw for his business partners, every anniversary dinner, every Easter Sunday with the full extended family. That was me. Entirely me. His colleagues used to ask him for the name of his caterer. He would smile and say, "Oh, that's just Catherine. Just Catherine." So I had been speaking to a woman I know through our church, Elaine Forsyth. Elaine runs a small events coordination business out of her home in Oakville, and she had been nudging me for 2 years to formalize what I already did naturally. She had even lined up a potential first client, a retirement community on the Niagara Escarpment that needed someone to manage their quarterly celebration dinners. It was modest. It was manageable. It was mine. I told Richard about it over the chicken and the roasted carrots and the good burgundy he opened without asking if I wanted any. He set down his fork. Then he laughed. Not a polite, uncertain laugh. A real one, the kind that fills a room. Our son, Matthew, was there that evening. He had driven up from Hamilton for a meeting the next morning and stayed for dinner. Matthew looked down at his plate. He did not say anything. That part I remember as clearly as I remember the sound of Richard's laughter. My own son, looking at his roast chicken while his father laughed at his mother. "Catherine," Richard said, when the laughing settled into something more like a smirk. "You're 61 years old." "I know how old I am," I said. "Catering is brutal. The margins are terrible. You'd be on your feet for 12 hours. You have no commercial kitchen, no equipment, no business experience." "I have 34 years of business experience," I said. "I just haven't been paid for it." He waved his hand the way he does. The way that means the conversation is over because he has decided it is. It's a nice idea. It really is. But let's be realistic. I did not argue. I cleared the dishes. But something had changed that night, and I don't think I can fully explain it to anyone who hasn't felt it. The particular way a small humiliation can harden into a decision. It wasn't rage, exactly. It was more like clarity. Like a fog I hadn't even known was there had simply lifted. I called Elaine Forsyth the next morning. What I want to tell you about the months that followed is that they were not triumphant, not at first. They were exhausting and uncertain and frequently humiliating in entirely new ways. I want to be honest about that because I think people tell these stories as if the moment you decide to prove someone wrong, everything starts going right. That is not how it went for me. I incorporated a small company in October of that year. I called it Hearthstone Catering. After the hearthstone in the kitchen of the house I grew up in Thunder Bay, which my mother used to say was the heart of the house. My mother had worked as a cook in a hospital cafeteria for 22 years. She would have found all of this both amusing and entirely logical. The retirement community engagement came through. $1,400 for a 3-course dinner for 84 people. After costs, I made just under $300. I was on my feet from 6 in the morning until 11 at night. My lower back felt like someone had taken a wrench to it. I did not tell Richard how little I had made. He didn't ask. What I did do was take that $300 and put it in a separate account that Richard didn't know about. I want to be clear that I'm not proud of the secrecy, but I had watched what happened when I told him things early, before they had any weight to them. He would dismantle them with his casual, reasonable voice before they had a chance to become real. So I protected this. I kept it quiet and I let it grow. Elaine helped me with the business side, the invoicing, the HST registration, the contracts. She is a practical woman and a generous one. Her husband, Warren Forsyth, a retired engineer who putters around their garage building things, used to drop off equipment she found at restaurant supply auctions. An extra chafing rack, a set of half pans, a proper serving trolley. I stored everything in my garage, in the section where Richard used to keep golf clubs he hadn't touched in 5 years. By February, I had 4 clients. By April, 6. By June, I had to hire 2 part-time helpers, a culinary school graduate named Penny, and a retired school cook named Frances Okafor, who could debone a chicken faster than anyone I had ever seen. Frances had this wonderful stillness about her. She didn't talk much while she worked, because it distracted them. She just moved through a kitchen like she owned it, and everything she touched came out perfectly. Richard noticed that I was busy. He noticed that I was gone in the evenings sometimes, and on weekend mornings. He noticed the stack of folders on the corner of the kitchen desk. But Richard Beaumont is a man who has never once in 34 years asked me what I was doing with my time. It would not have occurred to him that my time had value he wasn't tracking. What he did notice, eventually, was the money. This is where I have to talk about something that I still find difficult to say out loud, even now. Richard and I had a joint account, the household account, where his business income came in and from which all our household expenses were paid. I had never questioned this arrangement. I had no reason to. It was simply how we had always done things. I paid for groceries, utilities, gifts, the dog's vet bills, my own clothes, everything out of that joint account. Richard covered the mortgage and the larger bills. It was, I suppose, a system. In late June, I went to make a payment to a supplier, a small food distributor based in Burlington, and my card was declined. I stood at the counter of the cash and carry, with Frances Okafor standing just behind me, and I stared at the machine. Insufficient funds. I used my personal credit card, the one I'd had since before we were married, in my own name, and I paid for the order. But when I got home and checked the joint account, I found that a significant portion of the balance had been transferred 3 days earlier. To one of Richard's business accounts. We had never discussed this. There was no note, no phone call. I had paid from that account a deposit to a rental kitchen facility the week before. If that check had come through after the transfer, it would have bounced. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Richard's business, Beaumont Consulting Group, had been struggling. I knew this in the vague, peripheral way a wife knows things she isn't told directly. The tightness around his eyes when certain client names came up, the quieter dinners, the bottle of scotch that emptied faster. I had not known how badly things had deteriorated. I had not been told. He had taken our household money to shore up his business accounts, without asking me, without telling me. I think this was the moment I understood that the laughing at the dinner table had not been careless. It had been the symptom of something deeper, a fundamental assumption that I did not have standing in my own life, that my interests were not separate interests, that what I thought I was building was, in his understanding, merely an extension of what already belonged to him. I called my daughter-in-law, Amanda Whitfield. Amanda is Matthew's wife. She is a family law paralegal, which is not exactly a lawyer, but she knows enough to be frightening. More importantly, she is one of the most clear-headed people I have ever met in my life. I called her from my car, parked in the driveway, because I didn't want to go inside. She listened to me without interrupting. Then she said, "Catherine, I want you to do a few things before you say anything to Richard." I did those things. I'm not going to detail them all here, because some of it is still ongoing. But I will tell you that Elaine Forsyth's husband Warren, the retired engineer who pokes around in garages, had once mentioned that his sister in Mississauga ran a small accounting practice. Her name was Gloria Chen. I called Gloria Chen the next day. Gloria is the kind of accountant who asks the questions that make you realize you've been looking at the ceiling your whole life when the answers were on the floor. She spent 2 weeks going through everything. I brought her the household records, what I could access of Richard's business filings, 3 years of bank statements. When she called me with her preliminary notes, she used a tone of voice that was completely professional and somehow also deeply kind. "You have been financially supporting this household in ways that were never recognized," she said, "and your contributions to your husband's business entertaining clients, managing his professional social calendar, the work that kept his relationships intact, those have value, quantifiable value. I had never heard anyone say that before. Not in 34 years. Meanwhile, Hearthstone Catering had started doing something I hadn't expected. It had started growing in a way that felt almost embarrassing given how much Richard had laughed. By August of that year, I had been approached by a conference center in Burlington that needed a preferred catering vendor for their smaller corporate events. The contract was worth just under $40,000 annually. I sat in their boardroom. A real boardroom, with a long table and a window overlooking the lake, and I signed my name on the contract line that said sole proprietor. I drove home and I sat in the car again. $40,000. My husband had laughed at me, and here was $40,000. I went inside and made dinner. I did not say anything. It was Matthew who finally made things come apart, in the way that only family can. He had driven up again in September, another meeting in the city, and he stayed for dinner again, this time without Amanda. Richard was in a reasonable mood. We had wine. The conversation moved, as it often does in our house, to Richard's business, his clients, the state of the consulting market, and then Richard said, in his offhand way, "Your mother's little catering project is keeping her busy." Something passed across Matthew's face. I watched it happen. He had been carrying something since the night of the laughing. I think he had been carrying it all those months and he had not known where to put it down. He said, "Dad, do you know what Mum's catering project is actually worth?" Richard made a sound. Dismissive, the beginning of the hand wave. "Dad." Matthew's voice was quieter this time, but firmer. "Do you actually know? I know it's keeping her busy. She has a $40,000 annual contract with a conference center. She has 6 regular clients. She employs 2 people. She's been doing this for less than a year." The table went very quiet. Richard looked at me. I looked at him. "That's," he started. "More than you made in your first year of Beaumont Consulting," Matthew said. "I actually looked it up. You've mentioned it often enough over the years." Richard did not say anything for a long time. I think about that silence a great deal even now. I think about what it must have felt like for him. A man who has organized his entire understanding of himself around being the capable one, the knowledgeable one, the one who sees around corners, to sit at his own dinner table and have his son hand him that information, quietly, without cruelty, but without softening it either. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be clear about that. I felt something more complicated. I felt sad, and I felt relieved, and I felt, underneath both of those, a kind of grief for the version of our marriage that had existed in my imagination for 34 years, but had apparently never existed in his. After Matthew left that night, Richard and I sat in the living room. We did not have the television on, which is unusual for us. We just sat. "I didn't know it had grown like that," he finally said. "You didn't ask," I said. "You never ask." He turned his glass in his hands. "I laughed at you." "Yes, at the table. Yes." And Matthew was there. I could see that this fact, Matthew being there, was, for Richard, the most uncomfortable part. Richard is a man who cares deeply about how his son sees him, perhaps more than he has ever cared about how I see him. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. It's just true. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know," I said. "I believe you. But sorry doesn't quite cover the part where you moved money from our household account without telling me. That's a different conversation, and it's one we're going to have, Richard. With clarity, and with some outside help, I think." He was quiet for a long time. "Gloria Chen," he finally said. "He must have found something at some point. A statement, a name." "Yes," I said, "and Amanda has also been involved." He closed his eyes briefly. "Matthew knows?" "Matthew's wife is a paralegal who specializes in family law. So yes, Matthew knows. Here is what happened over the following months. I won't dress it up or draw it out, because it is still tender in the way that real things are tender when they're not fully healed. Richard and I went through a process. Several conversations. Some of them with a financial mediator Gloria recommended. A woman named Sandra Park, who operates out of an office in Mississauga, and who has the most calming presence I have ever encountered in a professional context. We established separate accounts. We established that Hearthstone Catering is mine. Fully. Legally, unambiguously mine. and that any financial decisions affecting our household require both of our informed consents. Beaumont Consulting Group did not have a good year. The numbers I later saw, through the formal process with Gloria and Sandra, showed a 39% decline in revenue. His two largest clients had moved to a competitor. He had been borrowing against the household to slow the bleeding without addressing what was actually causing it. We are still married. I want people to understand that. We are working through this, and it is not easy. And there are days when I look at him across the kitchen and I feel the weight of what came close to happening. The slow dissolution of everything I thought I had built. But I also see a man who, when he finally understood the scope of his mistake, did not deflect or minimize or disappear. He sat in those meetings. He listened. He said, on more than one occasion, in the presence of witnesses, that he had been wrong. That is not nothing. Matthew called me one evening in November. He said, "Mum, I need to tell you something." His voice had that particular quality it gets when he is working up to something difficult. He said, "I should have said something that night at dinner." When Dad laughed. "I should have said something right then." "You were in an impossible position," I told him. "Maybe, but you've been in an impossible position for a long time, and you managed." I didn't say anything for a moment. "I watched you do all of that work," he said, "for his business, for this family, for years and years, and I never said anything about it either. I think I took for granted that that's what you did." "I'm sorry, Mum." I sat down on the edge of the bed. I thought about my mother's kitchen in Thunder Bay. The hearthstone. The way she would be on her feet all day at the hospital and come home and stand at the stove for another 2 hours, and how no one called it work. "Thank you for saying that," I told him. "That means more than you probably know." Hearthstone Catering is heading into its second year with 3 new corporate contracts and a conversation underway with a hotel group in Burlington about a longer-term arrangement. Gloria Chen has become not just my accountant, but one of the most trusted people in my professional life. Frances Okafor got a part-time manager title last month. She was already doing the work, it just needed a name on it. Penny finished her diploma and is staying on. Elaine Forsyth threw a small dinner to celebrate the anniversary of when I first called her. She made the food herself, which I thought was a wonderful act of cheek. Warren built me a storage rack for the garage that is, genuinely, the most organized piece of furniture I have ever owned. Richard came to that dinner. He sat at Elaine and Warren's kitchen table and he ate Elaine's food. And he listened while she talked about what Hearthstone had been doing, and at some point he said, quietly, "To no one in particular, I didn't know she could do this." Elaine looked at him across the table. "She is a woman of great composure, Elaine," she said. "She always could, Richard. That was never the question." He nodded. He didn't argue. "I am 62 years old. I built something at an age when my husband assumed the building was done. I built it quietly, in the hours he never asked about, with women who understood what it meant to do work that goes unrecognized. I built it in a garage next to his unused golf clubs. I built it from a conversation at a church function and a hearthstone I haven't stood in front of in 40 years. My mother used to say that the most dangerous thing a woman could do was let someone else decide what she was capable of. She was right. She was a hospital cafeteria cook who never had a business card, and she was absolutely right. I am still here. I am still standing. And the kitchen, as it turns out, has always been mine.